大家好，我是 James 王俊英，欢迎来到 Talk with James，说说英语，聊聊生活频道。反思自己学习语言的经历，我总结了学习语言的理念和成功经验。今天要把这些想法和观点给大家分享，希望能够对各位朋友有帮助。以下的内容以英语为主。Let's get started. I want to begin with a question. How do you know when you've learned something? How do you know if that knowledge fully belongs to you? Very recently, I was revisiting my studies of Canadian history because that's where my family is from. That's where I grew up. And although I was raised in the Canadian school system, I realized that I remember almost nothing about what I studied back in elementary school and high school. And by the way, in high school, I was a straight A student. And yet, there's a whole section in my brain, the knowledge of Canadian history, that seems to be non existent. So did I really learn Canadian history back in school, even though I did well on those assignments and exams? In the West, Asian people, Chinese people have a reputation for doing very well in school, doing very well in tests, exams. But I wonder how many of us even remember what we learned in high school. So, for example, if you are from China, how many of you, a few years after you graduated from high school, or even now, now that you're an adult, perhaps a working professional now, that you remember anything from what you studied for the Gaokao, or equivalent if you're from Taiwan or from Hong Kong? I suspect many of you share my experience. You just can't remember. And I also guess that many of you who learned English as a second language did pretty well in school for passing the English tests, such as the TOEFL. But after you immigrated to the West, the real test begins, the test of real life, interacting with people in the society, working here, living here. And when it came to that, you realize you were not as high level in English as you thought. My vision of language learning comes from my broader vision towards learning in general. And in English, we often use this big word to describe the philosophy of learning and teaching with the word pedagogy. Pedagogy. My learning vision is to see that learning is deep and wide. My pedagogy is a deep and wide pedagogy. This broadens your motivation and goal in how far you want to take learning and in all the areas that you want to take your learning, and it will shape your studies, in this case of English, for the rest of your life. So let me explain what I mean by deep and wide learning. I want to start by explaining what deep learning is. What I described from my high school experience can be called superficial learning. It does achieve a few things, though, like obtaining knowledge, at least for the time, memorizing it, completing the assignment, completing the exam, and getting the degree. But deep learning means that the knowledge impacts you holistically. This learning transforms your thinking, what you know, and second, your perspective, your worldview. I differentiate between knowledge and perspective in this way. Knowledge is the information you can recall and you can talk about. Perspective is the way in which you perceive the world. It is your underlying value system, your fundamental convictions. What's important to you? What do you notice in the world? What do you notice when you're reading? So, to use an analogy, knowledge is like the things that you see. So, for example, there's a table in front of me. There is a guitar over here, this side, over here. There is a book over here. This is Lu Xun, the 狂人日记. Okay, it's knowledge is reading about what Lu Xun wrote about in his essays. But perspective is like glasses. It's like wearing glasses or contact lenses. Sometimes you forget you have them on. It shapes the way you interpret the world. It helps you select information as to what's important to you. And deep learning changes both what you think, what you know consciously, and how you think. Deep learning also impacts you on an emotional level. So, by emotion, I mean, of course, all the emotions like feeling happy or sad, angry or excited. But what I mean by that, additionally, is the deeper emotions that come from your conviction or what is important to you, such as when you feel anxious, when you are thinking about possible failure, okay, for example, in school or in your career, or happiness when you can see success, or when you see success in your children. These deeper emotions based on your goals, your values, your principles. Deep learning also impacts what I call the heart. The heart. Your heart is the deepest part of who you are. Your deepest motivation in life. Your heart is the part of you that determines what you live for, what gives your life meaning, why you work every day. I don't just mean to earn a paycheck, to earn a money, but perhaps some of you think, no, you want to earn money so that your family can be successful. You want to give your family a good life. See, that is your heart, where your heart is at. What do you want for your future, the future of your kids, and things like that? The deepest motivations of who you are is what I call the heart. And also, because deep learning impacts the whole of who you are, it allows for actually greater retention of knowledge. Remember how I mentioned earlier, I could barely remember what I learned from Canadian history back in high school, right? That is not good retention. I didn't retain that knowledge. But if you have deep learning, you will retain the knowledge. And I want to give a couple of examples. One example is actually comes from what my mom used to say to me when I was younger. And I would come home and I had a bad experience because a teacher or a sports coach criticized me, and I felt unhappy because they said I wasn't doing right on this or this or this, or I need to change on this, or maybe it was just a criticism. It wasn't even meant to help me, but they just didn't like me. And I told my mom that experience, and my mom would say in Cantonese, "你知唔知嗰個人係塞錢落你個袋?" In other words, it just means that person is putting money in your pocket, the literal meaning from Cantonese. And to this day, almost like I'm sharing with you now, years later, I mean, she told me this when I was a little boy. To this day, I still remember my mother saying that to me. And to this day, when people criticize me, sometimes they criticize me because they want to hurt me even. Um, I am able to be more patient. I'm able to step back, pause, and think, okay, is there truth in this criticism? Is there an area in my life that I do need to change? And I actually try my best to change. Instead of just feeling sad, I remember the advice my mother gave me and I try to apply it. I remember it to this day. So that is deep learning. Here's another example. And this one relates to language learning. When I was learning French in Quebec, this is the Eastern Canada, I will never forget. There's a verb form in French called the subjunctive form. Subjunctive form, and I don't need to explain what that is. But the point of the story I want to share is I was working as an exchange student in a daycare, all in French. Everything was in French. It was in Montreal, and I was trying to ask my coworker, if do you I asked her, "Do you want me to go to the other room to go see how the children are? Do you want me to go to the other room?" I wanted to ask her that. But because I did not use that form, that subjunctive form, what it sounded like was, and she explained this, my coworker explained to me later on, it sounded like I was asking her, "Do you want me romantically?" 你要得到我吗？这样子比较暧昧，这样子这些对白。So in other words, if I didn't use the right form, I said something completely different. And my coworker was really kind. She corrected me. She explained it to me, and now that I'm able to explain to you now, this was back in high school in grade 11. Okay, this is when I was 16 years old. I still remember that, and I will never forget the subjunctive form. That experience impacted me deeply, and to this day, I remember that verb form in French. Here's another thing about deep learning. It enables adaptability in different settings. Deep learning in English means that not only would you be able to pass your exams in French for in English, French, French is for me, English is for you. In English, for example, but to and you're able to qualify for immigration here. You're able to come to an American school here for university, find a job here in United States or Canada, and so on. But it should expand beyond those immediate goals. It means that you can adapt to having conversations in different settings, in a casual setting. It means that when you're reading road signs, you're driving here, you can understand all the road signs. It means that when you can understand the English newspaper. It means that you can interact with the servers at a restaurant using English. You can do small talk with the restaurant servers. You can read documents that are from your school or from your workplace that's not directly within your professional training. So adaptability in various settings. Deep learning for English also means that you yourself have changed. And I want to just unpack, I said this a little bit earlier on, but I want to unpack this in terms of not only because earlier I mentioned it changes both what you know in terms of the contents, the knowledge, and also how you know. But I want to elaborate a little bit on how deep learning for English, learning English means that you actually think in English. Think in English. So what's the opposite? The opposite, if you don't think in English and you're trying to learn English as a second language or a third language, is that you are translating in your head between Mandarin to English, English to Mandarin all the time. Okay, so when you listen to an English speaker, you're thinking, ah, 什么意思？中文是什么意思？怎么翻译呢？Like you're thinking this in you're thinking about what their meaning is in Chinese. And conversely, when you're trying to speak English, you're trying to say, "Okay, 我要跟他说这个,然后 okay, 英文怎么说呢?" Okay, so you're translating, and the problem with this is number one, it's way too slow, as many of you have experienced. When you're actually in a social setting, you can't catch up with what everyone is saying because it sounded like people are speaking too fast, but honestly, once you have been here for a long time, you kind of you can catch up with the speed of the English, but really because you are translating, it's not that they are speaking too fast only, it's that you are understanding too slow. And so it's too slow. And it makes you less effective, even in your school or in your work setting. But also, if you think in Chinese and translate rather than think in English, it's bound for misunderstanding. And so you must understand what the other person is saying. So, for example, I'll give you an example that I notice many times actually with Mandarin speakers. Let's say you are chatting casually with one of your Western friends, and they're asking you. Let's say you watched Avatar 2 recently, okay, and you're telling them about it, and then they ask you, "Oh, you just watched Avatar? How did you find it? How did you find it?" Now, I noticed many Chinese speakers they did it. They seem to be doing a translation in their head, and they start thinking, "Oh, okay." 他问我的是我怎么找到这部电影。So then your answer, 你的回答就是, "Oh, I found it at the movie theater," or "I found it on a website," or you might say, "My friend told me about it." But what they're actually asking you is not 你怎么找到这部电影，就是 how do you feel about the movie? 你对这部电影有什么的感触，什么的感想？ Okay, so when you translate the literal meaning, it's bound for misunderstanding. One of the YouTube channels I often watch to learn Mandarin because you're learning English, I'm trying to learn Chinese. One of the YouTube channels I watch is a channel called Short Chinese, and the speaker in that video explains that when you're learning a language, and she's teaching Chinese, you need to get the feeling of the word. You need to feel the word. So I think she's absolutely right, and I want to repeat what she said in that if you want to learn English deeply, you need to not only think in English, but you need to feel the language. You need to retrain your brain so that you feel the language. So, what do I mean practically? It means that you not only understand the meaning of the words, but you feel the nuance，你能够明白背后的意思，你能够感觉到微妙的意思。So, for example, let's say your friend, your American friend, uh, is offering you a snack. He's eating potato chips. Okay, and then he offers it to another coworker, and you're sitting, I guess, in a lunchroom or something like that. And then the coworker says, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." The words "I am okay." Okay. You First of all, you should understand that the meaning of what she's saying is she says, "No, thank you." Okay, no, thank you. But you should feel her response as trying to say, okay, well, I don't really need it right now. She's trying to be polite. She's trying to gently say no. 有一点像不要了，谢谢. Okay. So you should feel the meaning of what she's trying to say. She's trying to lightly say no in a gentle way. But maybe next time it's not because she doesn't like chips, but maybe in that moment she doesn't want to have any. Okay. So those are the nuances in the language, and to feel English in every aspect. So that's what it means to feel the language when you're listening. In the same way, when you are speaking English, to feel the language means that you convey your personality. I mean, you do it normally in Mandarin all the time, right? With your friends in Mandarin, your coworkers, classmates, your family members. When you speak in Mandarin, you're just expressing your personality naturally. It's all the unique aspects of your personality, maybe your humor, or maybe you're a little bit 内向, a little bit introverted, or 外向, extroverted. Whichever it is, you're expressing your personality. I want to give you an example. So I was talking to my student who is in high school, and I was sharing with her about one of my experiences. I think it was when it was earlier on when I came to Canada, and I was bullied because I was Chinese. Back then, there were, I guess, greater experiences of racism, unfortunately, back when I was younger, when I was a kid. And I was telling her how I stood up for myself, and I started to stand up for and defend not only myself but other kids that were bullied by those same people. And then my student said this. She said, "Handsome." She said, "Handsome." Okay, now I knew she was trying to say shy, right? Except in English, because this is an English. I'm teaching her English. It's an English class, and she was right in engaging emotionally in my story when I was telling her my story. This is actually one of the strategies in deep learning. And so I simply encourage her to take that feeling and use a different word that we normally use in English to express the same kind of feeling. Kind of like, for example, you might say sweet or cool or awesome, or some of the younger people here, I think they say lit, even though I'm a little bit too old to understand or use that word. I think it's LITE, lit. Okay, so to use a different word, so not handsome, because handsome means you're good looking. That's basically all that it means. It means you're good looking, and actually, very few people use the word handsome today in English. They might just say good looking or hot or something like that. And so, my suggestion for you when you are speaking English is to just let yourself express yourself. I know that one of the biggest barriers in language learning is your fear. 你感觉到比较尴尬，一点儿惧怕. Okay, so a little bit reserved. You're a little bit embarrassed you're afraid of making mistakes in English. And I really want to encourage you to not think so much about how people will respond or whether it's embarrassing, but just let yourself interact. Speak what's on your heart, on your mind in English. Try to think in English and just speak and be spontaneous. Respond the way you would when you're speaking Chinese. And I know that you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but I want to encourage you that this is the way to learn. This is the way that you retrain your brain to feel the language. You have to say what's immediately on your mind. And then later on, someone might correct you. That's okay. Or afterwards, you might correct yourself. That's okay too. And then later on, you get better and better at it. But then at least you have a feel for the language. So, deep learning means that you have so internalized English to the degree that you think in English and you feel and experience life in English. If you can achieve this, you will be able to do well both in your academic and vocational goals, your professional goals, and you will have a true and firm grasp of the English language. So that was deep learning. What about wide learning? Wide learning refers to applying what I just said in deep learning, but in every aspect of life. So when it comes to language learning, your learning goal, my recommendation is your learning goal should be not just doing well on your exam or getting that job or being able to immigrate here, but to be able to live successfully in all of Western society, every area. Because my guess is that for many of you, your learning goal is limited towards school or work. And I totally understand your desire to succeed in school, have a good education. Some of you may go back after graduation, back to Asia for work. Or maybe you might continue your career here. You want to earn the money, you want to be able to settle down here. I understand that motivation. But I want to encourage you to expand your scope, your goal of success to every area of Western life. So basically, it simply means success in every part of life just means that you function as natural as you would in Chinese, in Mandarin, back in Asia, in all these other areas of friendship or in the restaurant and things like that. Because if you do this, if you apply wide learning, that is, you're able to internalize English for every part of Western society. The advantage is that you'll actually become even more successful in school and in your workplace. Because one of the reasons why many of you feel a disconnect when it comes to interactions outside of school and work, when you're having small talk with your coworkers, is because you don't feel as natural outside of talking about school or work topics because you haven't internalized English as a language in different settings, like more casually, like talking about family or food or traveling or movies or music and things like that. And so you're not able to talk about those topics with your coworkers or friends or classmates. So as a result, um, you don't build as close of a relationship in your workplace, and on a concrete level, it means that you are literally restricted in the amount of vocabulary you know outside of school and work. So I'm going to use myself again as an example. I have work experience as a Christian pastor in churches here in Greater Vancouver. And I remember when this was about 10 years ago, when I really first started to learn Chinese, Mandarin, I mean, Mandarin is my fourth language. I wanted to speak with the Mandarin speakers from Taiwan and China at my church. And when it came to topics about religion, because I'm a pastor, 如果是关于圣经、属灵生活、祷告这样子，okay, the religious topics, I understood what people were saying. When they were talking about the Bible, I understood it. And if I needed to talk about the Bible and Christian topics, I can communicate my opinion. The problem was when it came to every other topic, like news or hobbies or basketball or music, I couldn't catch up to what they were saying. Like even sometimes, like because I guess you would learn about household furniture, right? So for example, they would talk about like 柜子, 衣柜. I'm like, what is the 衣柜? Oh, and I had to look it up in the dictionary. They're talking about cabinets. Oh, they're talking about 装修, 在家里的装修. Okay, I get it. Talking about renovations. But I was lost. I didn't know what they were saying. And as a result, even for my work in the church, I was not able to effectively minister as effective as I could to the Mandarin speakers because there was a disconnect between me and them, right? I couldn't understand a lot of what they were saying, and they didn't feel fully comfortable talking with me about every part of their life in Mandarin. And so, for your English learning, if you primarily learn English in a classroom, or even if you took a course like 10-week business English course, you are limited in your vocabulary. And so, as a result, you may not know, even in your workplace, the exact things that your coworkers are talking about because every company and work culture is very different. But more than that, like I said, when you're having a casual conversation, what we call small talk, with your coworkers or your classmates, all these other topics, and the topics are endless because everyone's personality is different, their upbringing is different, their interests are different. um, you have a disconnect, and so you're not able to connect as closely with your classmates and coworkers or teachers. And wide learning means aiming to learn vocabulary and phrases, English, in every aspect of life. And if you can do that, and if you can also communicate naturally, and you have a feel for the language in all those areas, then you actually have an advantage in school and in your workplace. And the reason is because your overall English level will be much higher than your peers. You're able to do your work much more efficiently because if you're coming to Canada or the States for school, you're literally able to do your readings much faster if your overall English level is better. And the way to improve your English is not to focus on um, the topic specific English, but to learn English all across your whole life, and then your overall English increases. And when you do that, you can literally read faster than everyone else. You can write your assignments faster than everyone else. Same thing for your workplace. You're able to read your work documents, complete a work report much faster, much more accurately, with less mistakes. You're able to communicate more clearly. You're going to have less language barriers. You're able to get your point across. You're able to understand the assignment that, let's say, your boss gave you much quicker, much more accurate. And and to use a work example, because you can build that trust and that casual relationship with your coworkers, and especially with your manager or your boss, they'll like having you around, and it means that it will a make your work environment more pleasant. It'll be a more happy place. People, you'll be able to laugh with them. You're happy to be with them, and your manager will be more understanding to your needs and requests as they come up. So, for example, let's say you need to take certain vacation days during, let's say, a busy work period. It's possible your manager might be more understanding and be like, "Go ahead, go for it," because you've built that relationship. Or your manager may consider you, because you have a good relationship, for an internal job transfer or a promotion. Or if you move on from that workplace and you find a job elsewhere, your manager can be a good job reference for you because you've built that relationship. I want to speak about one more advantage for why I recommend deep and wide learning. And I want to speak to those who start or want to start or already have raised a family here in the West, or raising a family here in the West. So you have children. And having worked in church ministry for over 10 years and having interacted with many, many Chinese families, I noticed a trend of many immigrant parents not being able to communicate with their children. Now, of course, in every generation, parents and children will always have a disconnect because of the age gap, the generation gap. But I find that the additional challenge for immigrants with their children, let's say their children are born in the United States, so they are called ABCs, American born Chinese, ABCs, or ARCs, American raised Chinese. There's a further disconnect between the immigrant parents and the children because of language gap and cultural gap. The children are Westernized. They think in English, they feel in English, but the parents have not fully internalized English as a language and the culture, the thinking, the feeling of the language and the culture behind the language. And so as a result, there's even greater disconnect between parents and children, especially as the children get older. So if you embrace the vision that I am proposing of deep and wide learning of English, you're able to think and feel in English, and you apply this widely in all areas of life here in the West, you increase your chance to be able to better communicate with your children. And it is a huge advantage. Perhaps in another video, I'm going to elaborate on exactly what I mean by that advantage of being able to raise your children and understand them better. But I want to end this video with some practical suggestions. What can you do with this information? First, I want to suggest change your mindset about learning English and broaden your mindset. I have a few reflection questions that you can think about. And the first question is to ask yourself, to what degree have I internalized English so that I think and feel in English. And I have 5 points in terms of a rating from 1 to 5. Okay. And one is being not very comfortable, and five being very, very comfortable. And so I'm just going to read it to you. Um, to what degree have you internalized English? Um, would you answer one? I have lots of trouble communicating in English, and so I struggle even in a school or work environment. Or is it two? I can communicate on a basic level within a school or work environment, but I'm often doing translation in my head. Or three, I sometimes need to do translation in my head, but mostly I can communicate naturally in a school or work environment. Or is it four, I feel quite comfortable thinking in English and can somewhat adapt to different social settings, even outside of school and work? Or is it five, I have a good feel for English and can adapt to many social settings outside of school and work? And the purpose of this reflection question is, for many of you, it's probably not a five, maybe not a four, perhaps a one, two, or a three. Now, then you become aware of where your level is. Then you can ask yourself, okay, which number do you want to get to? Which level? Is it a four? Is it a five? And now you know kind of the gap between where you're at and where you want to get to. Furthermore, how would you like to expand your goal in English learning? Like, which areas do you want to learn? So, for example, which social context in the West do you want to begin to work on? Is it casual conversation? Is it small talk? Is it talking about sports? Is it talking about how your children are doing? Because that's not business language. It's not business vocabulary. It's you may be talking to your coworkers, and you might have children similar age. Is it talking about how to raise your children? Which areas do you want to work on? And so that's where you can focus. That's where you can start thinking about how to learn in that area, being more intentional about learning that vocabulary or expressing yourself. And I guess a further question is what I said earlier about raising children is, if you have children or you want to raise children, the question is, what are my hopes for raising my children in the West in terms of communicating with them in English, understanding their Westernized mindset, raising them according to Western society, perhaps according to the experiences they'll have when they're going to school here, when they're interacting with their friends here, when they are involved in the English social media, 社交媒体, okay, just a Nero. Okay, is it any of that? So think a little bit, and it will help you think through what exactly you want to learn, and that will help guide where you need to start. Another practical suggestion is, when you're thinking about this, is some of you might be thinking, wow, there's a lot to learn in English. You may have done really well, like I was explaining, in school and in work, but all the other areas, there's a lot to work on, and you feel overwhelmed. And I want to encourage you, don't feel overwhelmed. Keep on learning day after day. There's this very strange saying in English. I think it came from probably another cultural background, but it goes like this: How do you eat a whole elephant? A bite at a time. Okay, now I don't know where the saying came from, why anyone would eat elephants in the West, but the point of the saying, the wisdom behind it, is that when you're facing something enormous, like an elephant, an enormous task, the way to achieve it is to not worry about how big it is, but to do it a bit at a time, bit by bit, day by day. So, my encouragement to you is, don't feel overwhelmed. Figure out what you need to work on, and then write down what are specific things that you can work on in that area, and just apply it every day. And then over time, um, after a month, after 2 months, after 6 months, you'll begin to feel improvements. Other people actually will probably even say to you, "Wow, your English has improved so much. It sounds so much more natural." They'll encourage you. So don't worry about how far you're at, but only you think about it, you plan it, and then you work on it. Okay. And for practical suggestions for how to improve in your English, you can watch my other video on the immersion language learning method. But here I'll just mention two quick suggestions that you can easily do. And one is, if you are here in the West, you start off by listening carefully to other English speakers, and you imitate them, you copy them, you copy their expressions. I think that is probably the most easiest way to learn because you don't need to read a book, you don't need to do more studying, you don't need to take a class. You just need to live your life and remember what your coworker or your friend said. So, for example, earlier when I was suggesting to my student, instead of saying handsome, because you would say shy in Mandarin, say awesome, cool, right? If you are a younger person, your classmates would be expressing excitement in their own way. You can copy them. And then later on, as you become more comfortable, when you feel English, you can develop your own expression. But in the beginning, you need to imitate. That's the first suggestion. Another one is to redeem your time. And that's actually how I improve on Mandarin. So while I'm driving, while I'm doing household chores, cleaning the house, cleaning the dishes, going for a jog, doing exercise, I'm listening to, in my case, Mandarin. In your case, it would be English, you know, listening to English podcasts, English music, just maybe talking to people in English. In my other video, I mentioned using Clubhouse. I think Clubhouse is a great app to learn and listen to natural English. So listening, redeem the time. So you don't need to add more time to what you need to do. But while you're driving, if it's safe, of course, while you're doing your chores, you redeem that time. You can also redeem your time while you relax. So for your recreation, for example, me and my family, we watch a Mandarin TV show, and I put on English subtitles for my wife. But we all enjoy it. My daughter enjoys it. I enjoy it. My wife enjoys it, and at the same time, I'm learning Mandarin. So you can redeem your relaxation time, hopefully, to um, activities that where you can actually learn English. Another practical suggestion is to slow down. You need to slow down because what I was explaining earlier in learning to think in English and feel the language is you need to slow down. You need to give yourself time to every week think about one conversation that you had with a coworker or a friend and think about what they were sharing with you because you might be thinking, hmm, I didn't quite feel or understand fully what they said. You need to reflect on it. And perhaps it's in between your commute. You're driving home to and fro from school or work, right? And you're thinking about the last conversation and you're thinking, oh, what do they mean by that? You need to give yourself think time rather to think about what they said, to feel what they're saying, to understand. And also you need to give yourself time to think about how you would express yourself in English in a way that you could feel the words. So, for example, you might think about a conversation and you thought, for some reason there was misunderstanding because the other person said, can you repeat that? What did you mean by that? Or do you mean this and this? And you need to think about it and you need to think about, okay, next time, how will I express this in English a little bit more clearly? And you know what? For me, when I'm learning Mandarin, I actually practice by myself sometimes saying Mandarin phrases so that the next time I come across the same situation, I will say that in Mandarin. So in your case, do the same thing with English. You think about, okay, I'm going to say this next time in English just to express this with my friend. And then you practice. And the next time you'll actually be better. My final recommendation in what to do with this vision of deep and wide learning is to get a tutor who can coach you. Now, my suggestion is before you find an English tutor, you should think through and write down your goals. So, the reflection question I gave you earlier is to help you reflect on um, which area you want to begin learning. And then when you write down your goals and if you find a good tutor and you communicate this goal to your tutor should be able to adapt your learning to your goal. So I'll give myself as an example again. When I about a year and a half ago, when I invited a tutor to help me with my Chinese, I communicated to her that my goals were in Mandarin is one, I want to communicate about high level academic topics in Mandarin, and then second, I want to be able to read academic books and even the classics in Chinese, like 孙子兵法、《论语》这样子. And so, because I communicated that, my tutor was a really helpful tutor. She helped me and she suggested readings in that. She explained to me how to interpret certain texts so that I can understand better. She helped me to express my ideas better. Every time we talked, we would talk about really complicated topics like culture, for example. How does language relate to culture and things like that? And she would help me to say, okay, why don't you try saying these words? Maybe these are the vocabulary you can use instead. And so in that way, after 1 year with my tutor, I improved quite a bit, quite a lot actually, and I was actually able to save time over time because she was able to guide me in how to have wide and deep learning in a new language. So that's my suggestion for those that if you have the time and money to invest and you want to improve on your English and you have that period of time, you want to improve more quickly to hire a good tutor. There are many good tutors out there, and you need to do your research. Perhaps you need to have like a phone interview with them to share with them your needs. That's kind of what I did actually to find my tutor. Share with them your needs, and you got to get a sense of whether they're able to provide you with that service, that very personalized learning service. Uh, and if you're interested in my tutoring services, you can feel free to contact me with the contact information below. But other than that,大家要努力学习英语，加油啊！I'll see you next time.